Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Today on the show I have Adam Sohmer. He's a well-known PR professional in the audio space for years and years now. Adam, we've known each other for a while. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, John. Good to see you.
Yeah. So obviously journalism, media is changing right now. I wonder what kind of stories you have to share about failure in this world right now.
Well, I mean, it's failure. It's a lot of challenges out there now, of course. And, at the risk of sounding a bit cliched, I think the whole point is that, at least since I've been doing this, you have to not only adapt, but evolve whatever it is you do. I guess next month will be my 21st year as a solo act, as a sole proprietor.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I had about 15 years on the corporate side in PR firms handling consumer tech, pro audio, all these things. If you would have told me when I got out of school about 1,000 years ago that this is what I would be doing now, especially, have some sort of entrepreneurial bent, I would have thought you were crazy. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still do. But for the most part, it's worked out extremely well. And it's not like I ever had a grand plan. In fact, I would say my career is the result of the opposite. So even now at this point, I find myself always trying to do something a little different and adapt to what the market needs are, while still holding on to what it is I do for a living, which is public relations and marketing, mostly for audio companies, whether it's consumer, pro audio, back-end technology, distribution channels, whatever it is. It's a big market and a small market at the same time. And I'm very lucky to have, let's say, a lot of contacts that have helped me over the years. In fact, you and I were exchanging notes not long ago about me updating my website, which is just about ready for prime time in about another week or so, because it didn't really need to. And it got to a point where I looked at it for some reason, and it was embarrassing because it looked like something that was about 18 years old. But my business has typically come from referrals. People I've worked with, people I've known, people who referred to me by others. So it's gone well in that respect. And even now with the challenges out there, I find that there's no need to panic yet. And for me, that's usually a healthy mix of being aware of what I do and what I'm good at and not good at, as well as a level of rampant insecurity. So I never let my guard down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this point, looking back, there were plenty of times where I've lost clients. Before that, I was let go from the first jobs I had in this market, when I was much younger. And, there's always somebody to blame. I think mostly the person to blame is yourself, if you even think along that line. But every time I got cut for whatever reason, it usually led to me getting something a little better. And that had more to do, I think, with confidence and being aware of what it is I know and how it helps than anything else. And that, for me, has always been the big challenge, because when you can push that insecurity aside, when that little voice about that's beyond your reach, when that gets out of your way, then it's more fun and easier to get to the next step.
I think a lot of people are facing layoffs or firings right now. What are some of the tricks that you've used over the years to manage those?
Not waiting. Anytime I got laid off early on, and it's been a while since I've had those experiences, because, like I said, now I have a client pool that comes, that grows and recedes on occasion. But with the layoffs, I found that it was like taking a punch, so, okay, I lost that round. but it forced me to think about, okay, what is it I want to do next? Do I like what I was doing? Were there things that I picked up that I knew were my issue or their issue? And sometimes if it's just a numbers game, it was really a matter of getting back in and talking to everyone I knew who I considered an ally and, or at least a positive acquaintance. And you can usually pick up on where the opportunities are from there. But anytime that I would just get hit and sit down and think about it, that would just set me back, because it was very easy for me to get inside my own head and think that, well, maybe I'm just not good at this. And most of the time that's BS. If anything, you have to learn how to navigate a challenging market at times. And that's really the hard part.
How do you build that kind of resilience? How do you build that kind of ability to take that punch?
Well, it's, the way you develop calluses by continually, using your hands and getting cut, getting scabs. So it was more experience. I never looked for that type of resilience. I really thought when I was getting out of school, my whole goal in life was to go into radio. Really solid career prospect, especially looking at that market now. But it's what I loved as a kid. And as that, once I looked at what I would have to do to get involved in that market in any serious way, I realized I didn't have the fire in the belly for it. And I just started to go out looking for jobs. I managed a used record store. I worked for a human resources agency. I worked for a small ad agency. Each time there was plenty I didn't like, and there would usually be nuggets that I would take to, even if it was just the people who worked there. So it was really over time that I started to pick up on where my value was. I also realized that, at least in my case, I was good at job interviews. And the reason I was is that I could go in kind of like this. And once I let down, the fear, and not be arrogant, not be cocky, but just have a relaxed conversation, that was almost 2/3 of the game. And then it was a matter of knowing what I was talking about. And once I could let go of that and be honest with them and myself, especially if I didn't know something about their business, it became a lot easier. And I think from there it started to build. So when I did get those setbacks, or I found myself in a negative situation, over time I learned not to panic.
Now, you probably had quite a few clients. So can you remember any clients that were particularly egregious that you had to route around or work with?
I do. I'm not going to be mentioning names of clients. I can tell you, in work situations, though, those challenges mainly came up when I worked for larger agencies. And again, I don't want to make it sound like they were terrible places to be. I learned to do what I do from those experiences and worked with some great people. But along the way, I also worked with, let's say, some managers who taught me what not to do as a manager. So, I try to keep it more positive, never a beating or things like that. There were times that, I felt like, there were people who just enjoyed a position of authority, and that was never my case. So when I started working with them earlier in my career, I was intimidated. I'd be up all night. I'd have anxiety attacks. And then over time, it moved way too slowly, in my opinion, but over time, I got past that. And once I did, it just didn't mean as much to me anymore. So thinking about, now that I have multiple clients at any given time, some are more challenging than others, and it doesn't mean I want to walk away from them. But then there are other times where I realize, this is just not going to go any further, and you have to be willing to cut the cord. But part of the benefit of what I do is that, I don't have one boss anymore, at least today, as of this conversation.
Has there ever been a time when you had to fire a client for whatever reason?
Oh, sure. No problem doing it. I don't get crazy with it. Again, I have bills to pay, but there are times where that it's just going in one big negative circle. And for whatever reason, whether the budget isn't high enough or my tolerance level just hits a peak, then I've had to say goodbye, but typically in one of my relationships, any agreement has a 30-day out for either side. So you can just say, okay, we've come to the end. I think you need something else now based on, recent conversations, and let it go. I've never stomped off and said, oh, this is crazy, I got to go. And it has less to do with them. I don't need to show that to anybody, but it's also for myself. I want to be in control of my actions, and I always feel there's a high road to whatever I do, including having to fire a client, or in the past having to fire staff.
I feel like the way you express yourself and the way you communicate is very controlled. Is that a product of you working in the space that you're working in? PR is obviously requires quite a bit of control, self-control, obviously.
I think any professional gig requires self-control. Whether or not people always realize it is another story. And I know that higher up you go in management, it can be more challenging for some than others. Like I said, I never planned on doing this for a living. So a big part of what I had to learn along the way was managing myself. Earlier in my career, when I worked for large agencies, I learned to manage others through experience and just being thrown in the deep end. But now it's really, if I have an anxious moment or two, I have to step back and wonder why. Is it something that I did or I'm not doing? If I feel like I'm not living up to my part of the bargain, or maybe expectations are beyond what, the relationship really called for, what I thought it called for. So, I do know that I don't like feeling out of control. And I think there's a certain amount of insecurity I bring to my gig, just because I never want to kick back and say, well, this is great, I'm going out to the movies today if anybody needs me. But at the same time, if I feel myself getting overwhelmed, I try to listen to that, because otherwise it's too easy to just snowball out of control. And I don't want to be one of those people who's always on edge, because of what they do.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. How do you manage the stress of being a freelancer in the way that you are?
Well, in my case, and this is really, I'm just talking about my experience here, I work in an area that I find interesting. I love audio. I mean, a lot of the records you see behind me, I've had since I was a young kid. This is part of my interest. So as I sort of worked my way into this field, it was only natural that companies that had audio components, and early in my career, I worked with Sony's PR agency, Fuji, others, Toshiba. So these were like big companies, big budgets, but they had audio divisions that I would naturally sync up with. I think because I understood it, and I got to know a lot of the press people then and now for the same reason. There's genuine interest. Not to say I couldn't do this for any number of categories if I had to, but I think the fact that I find it appealing has helped me navigate those waters, because we always have that in common. And if you can bring a little passion to what you do, it's just so much better than having to do a job.
How do you find that passion? How do you discover that passion? How do you get paid for it?
Well, how do you find it? It's, what are you interested in? For me, I've always loved music. I've always loved record collecting, and I like the equipment that goes along with it. I'd be following the field even if I was a cab driver. It's kind of like my sports. But, there are other people who, whether it is sports or whatever it is you're interested in, expound on that. So what are the components? If you're into pottery, well, there's equipment behind it. There's the art itself. There are the tools. There's the market. Anything that you find interesting, I think, is something to explore, even if you can't really, lack of a better word, exploit it right away. You can really dive in and learn more about it. And anything that matters to you has a business component or a nonprofit behind it. Even if it's something that's purely charitable, still, you have to get from point A to point B in any process, and certainly political movements, things like that. So, for me, it just sort of worked out this way. Like I said, there was no grand plan, But I would always suggest, and I suggest to younger people who ask, is what do you like? What do you find interesting? Botany, whatever it is, and then just work your way back from that. You won't always enjoy the work. I mean, there are some days I feel like, I'm banging my head against the wall, but that's the nature of the beast. And I've been doing this long enough to know that this too shall pass. Every day, sort of wraps up at some point. You're going to have bad days. And if you can't manage the bad days or the bad weeks, then you'll never notice the good ones, because that's business. There's a reason why you get paid, is to navigate projects, to navigate whatever it is you do. So if you have a genuine interest in it going in, it just makes it a lot easier to keep control over yourself and to take a real interest in what it is you do for a living.
Mm-hmm. Adam, where can people find you? I guess to hire you if they want to advertise some of their turntables.
Like I said, I'm doing a new website. So if you go up there now, you'll see something that needs tweaks. However, it's Sohmer Assoc, SOHMERASSOC.com. Also, SohmerPR.com is the new one. So we're working out a lot of the little bits about that. So that's a good place to start. Also, social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, the usual cast of characters there. And certainly if you're in this market, I'm always happy to talk to people. So if you want to drop a line, I don't know, how else we could do it. But if you just go up to SohmerPR.com or SohmerAssoc.com, it's a good starting point. And it has my contact information there. So send a text, send an email, smoke signal, carrier pigeon, whatever.
All right, super.
We got all the latest.
All right, this has been Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot.